Just outside Berlin, there's a neighbourhood that just doesn't feel German at all. You have these red brick houses with their white window frames and streets that look like they've been lifted straight out of the Netherlands. Now, I actually found this place by accident whilst I was actually planning a trip to Potsdam. And at first it just seemed like, a nice area to walk around. But once I got here, I started actually wondering, how it's actually survived for almost 300 years. Now, to fully understand this, you have to go back to the early 1700s, when Potsdam was actually part of a rapidly growing Parisian state, and is expanding in both power and ambition. And its king, Frederick William I, often called the Soldier King, believes something quite simple. A strong state doesn't just need soldiers, it also needs skilled workers. And during that period, some of the most respected craftsmen in Europe actually came from the Netherlands, as the Dutch cities were actually known for their practical urban planning, high quality brick construction, and the efficiency of their design. So instead of just inviting Dutch workers to actually move there, the king decided to build them something very familiar, an entire neighbourhood designed to look and feel like they're at home. So between 1733 and 1742, 134 red brick houses were actually built in 4 symmetrical blocks, designed by the Dutch architect Jan Bouman. These weren't grand palaces, they were working homes built for craftsmen and their families, often with workshops below and living spaces above. But far few Dutch settlers came than the king had actually hoped. But though this social experiment didn't fully succeed, the architecture, however, stayed. And that's what makes walking through here feel so unusual. Because once you know this place wasn't actually accidental, that every brick was actually part of a deliberate plan, you start seeing these streets very differently. It's not just a pretty area, it's an idea that's kind of like been frozen in time. And walking through it today, you can still feel that structure, as the streets are ordered, repeated, and very, very intentional. But what makes it interesting isn't just the architecture, it's how normal everything actually feels. Like people walking between shops, or even just sitting outside cafes. And then on market days, when we actually visited, there were stalls, selling, drinks, cooked food, along with people just chatting and going about their everyday. And that's what stood out to me. This place wasn't built to impress royalty. It was actually built to work, built for trades, built for families, and just built for everyday life. And nearly 300 years later, that's exactly what it's still doing. Now, as a photographer and filmmaker, it's the kind of place that naturally slows you down. You start noticing people more than the actual buildings themselves. From someone standing outside a cafe, people having a conversation, bikes resting against the wall, and just, even people just enjoying the food outside of a shop window. Just those small, everyday moments. And that's what really makes sense. This place was actually, designed for just normal life. And that's exactly what it still holds on to. So nearly 300 years ago, this place was just an idea. A king trying to strengthen his state by recreating something that, worked somewhere else. Now, it didn't completely succeed in the way that he actually planned. And over time, what started, as a political decision became something much simpler, a neighbourhood. A place where people live, work, meet friends, buy food, and just sit outside cafes. And I think that's what makes it interesting. Because when you're walking through here, you're not just looking at old buildings. You're looking at how history quietly shapes the places that we actually move through every single day. And for me, that's one of the most fascinating things about being just outside Berlin. Within such a short distance, you can step into completely different worlds, each built for a reason, each carrying its own story. And this one just happens to be written in red brick.